Sure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to talk. As everybody knows, I was elected in 2012. I was sworn in January of 2013. While it feels like a much longer time in the Senate, it's only been about a year, a little bit over a year and a half, coming up on 2 years in January. I'm very proud of many of the things that I've been a part of in the Senate. Very proud of many of the reforms that are also in the works that I think are undone or still need to be completed. One of which, or the largest, obviously, of which is Senate Bill 16. But one thing I've tried to do, which is kind of an overarching goal of mine, is to not just show up to complain. I think many times elected officials get in the mode of offering complaints or explaining to voters why there's problems and what the problems are. But what I've tried to do in my first term is be part of a solution. And there's any number of examples where sometimes that makes it difficult when it comes to the politics. But I've always tried to make myself part of that solution. So in my mind, and this goes back to my tenure as a local official, and I learned this on the city council in Bunker Hill many years ago, that it's not just good enough to complain about a problem. You have to be part of a solution, even in the face of difficult circumstances, or even in the face of perhaps having negative political consequences when it comes to offering those solutions. So that's what I've tried to do during my first term.
Why don't you talk about, and I know I heard you do this on the radio yesterday, but explain in layman's terms what Senate Bill 16 does, what it means to Springfield, and I know you were in my hometown of Evanston, and I guess they would lose money under this. So how do you get, I know the Senate has passed, how do you get, why don't you say what it does and how difficult it will be to pass, or how you will get it passed?
Yeah, it's been, so from a macro standpoint, if you take all the money that's spent on public education in Illinois, the 100% of what we spend, 25% of that comes from state government. So that's problematic on its face. And of that 25%, 42%, so less than half of the 25%, is distributed to the state's school districts based on need. So of everything that we spend on public education, less than half of 25% is distributed based on need. So that's a macro, view of how we fund schools in Illinois.
Is the rest of it grants?
No, the rest of it is locally generated, or the rest of the half of the states is grants that don't use need as the criteria for their disbursement. There's multiple silos of money in the state budget. Some of those things are conflicting in nature. They don't sync with each other. They were created over any number of years during budget discussions. So one program was created here to help get a budget passed one year, and it's been there ever since and grown. Another program was created to help get a budget passed one particular year, and there's any number of those examples. All of those things take away from what I think is the core purpose of state aid to schools, which is backed up by law, the school code, and the Constitution, and that's to strive toward greater equity and ultimately equity among the districts. So when you have a system where less than half of what the state spends, which is 25%, is based on need, you end up with the least equitable system in the country. And the thing I always open up with, and I opened up in Evanston, or wherever I am with the bill, is you have to acknowledge the fact that we own what we have. I mean, we own it, whether we like it or not, and that's where we have to start the conversation from. Because I don't think, and I haven't met anybody yet that says that the system we have today is a good one. No one has said to me to date, in the year and a half we've been at this, that you need to stop and we need to just preserve the system we have. The status quo works, because there's not a shred of data that defends what we have today. So the bill wipes that out. We come up with a simpler formula that consolidates these different programs in the state budget into an integrated formula, so that almost everything that we appropriate in a given year, whether it's a lot or a little, about 90, I think we're at 92% of the appropriation of the state's piece is distributed based on need. So that gets us in a very real way toward a system that over time will strive toward equity, as opposed to one today that every year passes. The budget that was just passed this past May is going to facilitate greater inequity. And next year it'll be less equitable than it is today. The year after it'll be even less equitable than it is next year. So Senate Bill 16 seeks to reverse that trend and get us on a better path over time.
So that would include things like transportation, the building fund, all of it.
Yeah. There's some exceptions. There's some exceptions. So during the, and by the way, our process, I didn't, these aren't my ideas. These are ideas that were brought to us by nonpartisan experts from around the country. It was a transparent process. We had hearings across the state. I think there were 7 in total, 46 hours of public testimony. Every document that was presented to us from anyone, whether they liked what we were doing or disliked what we were doing, was posted on the State Board of Education's website. Everything was open and transparent, because I'm of the belief that if we're going to get to the root of this, there has to be an open process where everybody has a seat at the table, and then not just giving them a seat just because it sounds good or looks good, but then you actually listen to what they have to say and put it in a bill. So that was at the core of what we were doing. So the things that are contained in Senate Bill 16 aren't from, coming from my perspective. They're coming from the perspective of experts that say, if you want to spend your money in a more meaningful way with a better outcome, this is what you ought to do. This is what's worked in Massachusetts. This is what's failed in Massachusetts. This is what's worked in California. This is what's failed in Florida, and get best practices for our $7 billion.
It's about $7 billion in the formula?
In this, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you said that there are these things that were implemented to pass budgets in past years, obviously there were, can you name 1 or 2 of those things that would go by the wayside, and what would it be replaced with? Just a need-based formula?
I'll give you 2, because if I mention one, then you get to geography in the state, which gets politically tricky, of course. Transportation dollars, let's take that for example, and I'll start there because my Senate district relies heavily on transportation dollars. Today, that's a separate line in the state budget. It doesn't use need as a criteria for how it's distributed. It's a reimbursement program, so there's no incentive to be efficient about how it's done. That money would be better served in a formula that distributes money based on need. And that's how I believe, ultimately, downstate school districts that rely heavily on transportation dollars today in the state budget would be better served. If we can have a formula that has more money in it, that's distributed on need, and not have a separate program to reimburse for transportation, we get more efficient use of limited state dollars, and that's more money driven into a formula that really gets at the root of what downstate rural districts are facing, which is inequity and lower property values and declining enrollment. None of those things are served by the formula today. So if downstate school districts look at an integrated formula and see that it serves their purpose, then the proposition of incorporating transportation into that formula isn't as scary as it always is. That's one. Another one, Chicago Block Grant. The bill eliminates the Chicago Block Grant. So you could imagine when I walked into the Senate Democratic Caucus and said, I have a bill that eliminates the Chicago Block Grant, the kind of reaction I got.
Which is how much now?
I don't remember the number. It depends on
a couple $100 million or so.
Yeah, no, it's more than that, because it's 20% off the top of everything.
Okay.
Regardless of the challenges that CPS faces or the enrollment, that was articulated well by the Senate Republicans, and that's a legitimate concern. And so the case to be made to eliminate the block grant is that does the block grant serve the purpose of CPS or the state as a whole? And Senate Bill 16 says, while that made sense in 1996 or 1997 when it was put into place, it doesn't make sense today. The state has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, but we're still moving money out the door the same way we did 20 years ago. So these are delicate things to juggle in a bill as complicated as this one. But the case is that if go back to where I started, if you're willing to own the system today, whether you just walked in the door or you've been there for a couple decades, like some of the biggest critics of Senate Bill 16, who've had ample opportunity to pass a bill to deal with this but haven't done it. Those are the biggest critics, by the way, ironically, of Senate Bill 16. If you can acknowledge that we have the least equitable system in the country, then you can begin a path to say, you know what, let's think about transportation differently. Let's think about the Chicago block differently, and let's move toward a formula that serves the state as a whole.
And I don't want to dominate with all of this, but just another quick question. Everybody asks, what does this mean for my school district? I know that's whatever it is, but what does it mean for Springfield? 186, or do you know?
Yeah, so under the current, so the variable in that equation of winners and losers is how much is in the budget in the first place. Senate Bill 16 doesn't change. It's not a budgetary proposition. It's a proposition of law, because it's the law that preserves the inequity today, because the law is the directions for how it's distributed. So Senate Bill 16 doesn't change the budget. One year there may be more than the next for school funding, but how you distribute whatever it is you have makes a big difference. So for Springfield, it would mean several million more dollars on an annual basis under the current budget framework. But that's not good enough to me. I mean, it's good to say, for example, District 186 would have several million more dollars in investment, but you got to peel back the layers and figure out why. Why? It's because poverty has grown. The number of special needs students has grown. The district is landlocked, so its EAV is going to be static. It's relatively static, especially compared to the state as a whole. The cost drivers for a school district are what's driving that result in Senate Bill 16. And to me, the flip side of the equation today is that we every year, the current formula gives districts that don't have those challenges more money. And oftentimes, those districts have sizable bank accounts, and they bank their state money. While at the same time, districts like 186 and the rural districts I serve and others across the state, they have to make reductions on an annual basis, and they are the ones that own the true cost drivers in the state system today. So it's good for 186, but it's good for a reason. And those reasons are based on what we heard in our public hearings.
At the same time, if I remember the numbers that came out, Pawnee, for example, took a pretty significant percentage of that. And I mean, are they swimming in gap and absorb something?
No, so let's talk about Pawnee. So Pawnee has, from what I recall, Doug, they have a substantially higher rate of students identified as special education students than the state average. So the way that money is paid to Pawnee today is based on the number of students identified as special education students. The bill would assume a special education rate for every district in the state, which is the state average. So it levelizes, it levels out money that's spent on special education from one district to the other, because we have some that spend a lot and some that don't. And what we're trying to do is use our money efficiently to get the same outcome in every school district. That would put us in line with other states. There's very few states that spend money for special education, not spend, but reimburse or provide money to districts for special education like we do here in Illinois. So that's one reason why Pawnee would be reduced under Senate Bill 16 under today's budget. But Pawnee's a perfect example of a district that where adequacy comes into question. So, Senate Bill 16 deals with equity. We have a whole nother question of adequacy. So Pawnee's a district that we should point to say we need more money in the system today at the state level. We need to get more than just 25% of what's spent on public education in the state coming from state government. Our Constitution doesn't say 25% cuts it, but that's a different question than Senate Bill 16. Adequacy would help out a district like Pawnee.
So you talk about your East St. Louis example I use.
Yeah, so I use this in Evanston. Tuesday night. And I don't have the numbers, and I should know them by now, but I don't have them in front of me for specific, but I'll give you the ballpark. So this would have been numbers based on data from a couple years ago. East St. Louis, their tax rate is over $7. They generate $1,200 per student with that tax rate, one of the highest tax rates in the state. And they have a 98% poverty rate. Arlington Heights High School District, I think, is the example that we've been using. Their tax rate is about a fifth of East St. Louis, and they generate well over 10 times as much money, $18,000 per student. With that small tax rate, and their poverty rate is in the 20s, which is about average in terms of how we count today. I use this, and I shouldn't point to Bernie when I say Evanston, but I use this in Evanston.
It's history.
Not to say that one's better or one's worse, or that this district does a better job at budgeting than this district, or kids here are more deserving than kids here. But I use it as an example to illustrate if anybody in the state doesn't think that framework doesn't present us a significant challenge, then we're never going to get anywhere with the Senate Bill 16 discussion. That is the world we live in, whether we like it or not. And the fact of the matter is, East St. Louis, and like many other districts, couldn't tax themselves enough if they wanted to bring about equity on their own. And so that's the purpose of state government. That's the purpose of the opening clause of our Constitution. And we're not doing it today. As a matter of fact, the budget framework and the law today together every year makes East St. Louis's challenge worse. Every year. The proration issue hits East St. Louis at almost $1,000 a student. Arlington Heights, I don't know the number. I think it was 50.
Because they get so much less state money.
Yeah. So when you think of it in relative terms of all these things stacked on each other, it's not too hard to conclude that our system today totally stinks, and we need to end it, and we need to not just complain about it and run campaigns on it and say we're going to reform it, and then you get over to the Capitol building and nothing happens. You got to put something on the table that changes the direction we're going as a state. And that is an extreme example, but I think it's a good way to frame the argument.
When you talk about adequacy, is that talking about more money in the pipeline?
Yeah.
And if so, where are you on the tax extension? Because I think you say you're not for it.
I'm not for it.
So
no.
how does this get done?
So we need more money in the system. That's clear. That's a clear message that we've gotten from educators that it's difficult to bring about equity without first dealing with adequacy. My response is it's difficult to deal with adequacy when someone like me, who would advocate for more money for schools, putting that money into today's formula is not going to get it to District 186 and others that need it the most. So these two things are parallel conversations, but they're very separate in terms of the process of the legislature. So we need to put money into the system. We need to reverse this trend of the state government only supplying 25% of what we spend on public schools. That obviously that's part of a larger budget conversation, and it has to fit into the larger budget framework. But I think for people like myself and many of my colleagues, I think we welcome the idea that before we say let's go raise revenue for schools or for any other purpose, we have to make sure that what we're spending money on today is spent in a meaningful way. And we've proven clearly that we're not doing that with schools today. So my response to the revenue question, I have many, but one of them is, if the 5% income tax rate raises money for schools, in the world we live in today, that doesn't help the people in my district that pay those taxes, because it's not going to get there.
But it is the governor of your party and his lieutenant governor candidate who are saying if you don't keep it at 5, you're going to blow a few or more $1 billion hole in the budget, and then everybody loses and they have to lay off. Paul Vella said 1 out of every 6 teachers in the state. Do you disagree, or is there some other revenue source?
Well, a couple things. A couple years ago, there were 6,000 teachers laid off in the state, and there wasn't a word said about it on the floor of the Senate. before I got there. So these are things that school districts have been struggling with for years. School funding isn't static. Every year, the funding formula recalculates itself, and excuse me. And districts have been grappling with those changes for years. School districts aren't flat. There's winners and losers every year. So many of the districts have been struggling with that scenario for the past 4 or 5 years, and they've already had to make those cuts, and they've already had to lay off teachers, or just get rid of art programs, or put kids in a closet, for an art class, or for a music class, or put kids in a room with no windows to learn. I mean, that happens every day in this state. So I don't think either situation is good. But I think where we get to where we need to go is we have to have a deeper conversation about, how do you generate revenue to fund state government that you want, and how do you get people to a point that they are comfortable with that conversation. And today I'm not, because we spend $7 billion on schools, and it's not done in a way that produces the outcome we want. So 5% income tax would produce revenue for the state, at a level that we're producing it now. But that doesn't fix the problem. I'm interested in fixing the problem.
Right, but it's going to take at least until next session to fix the problem.
Sure.
We're in the middle of a fiscal year that either the money will be there or not. So what do you do in the short term? Are you not saying what you would do in the short term?
No, I think we have to fix the problem. We were presented with a scenario in the legislature of having 5% or nothing. It's either you're for the 5% or you're not for any tax almost. I don't think I myself don't fall in either of those two categories. I think that the way to move forward is somewhere in between those things, and that takes, though, the first step has to be how do we spend the money that we have, and a lot of that has started, but the biggest piece is the $7 billion in the state budget for schools, and that's got to be part of the conversation.
But are you saying then that you could support an extension of the tax at a lower rate, not necessarily 5%, but you could go for 4%?
I could support revenue that's spent in a way that actually gets us to a solution. That's where we need to go. You can't operate state government without revenue. I think there's some people that think that somehow can happen. If you don't have revenue, that somehow cuts aren't going to happen, or somehow you can, cut your way out of the problem that we face today in the state. That's not going to happen either. But the idea that it's either nothing or status quo is an idea that I completely reject.
Are you open to services being taxed?
I'm not. So I'm not going to get into specifics.
Is this a campaign season?
It's a campaign season. It is. I'll just tell you though.
Retirement income.
I'll just tell you though. We have a just a lot like school funding. We have a tax code that hasn't changed much in decades, and I think that's one reason why we have just structural imbalances in our budget. There hasn't been a willingness to have that deeper conversation, and I think it's something that we have to have.
Going back to 16 for a second, you said before you expect the House to make some changes too.
Yeah.
There was some speculation that Madigan may try to use this as a vehicle to resurrect his shifting costs of local districts. Would that be a killer for this bill?
It would make it challenging. I don't know if it'd be a killer, but it would make it challenging. I view the money that goes, that's appropriated at TRS every year. We're the only state that does that, by the way. But money that's appropriated to make the pension payment to TRS, I view that as a dollar being spent on education. So a scenario that I think would kill the bill would be to shift costs of the TRS system to local school districts without reinvestment in schools of that money. I think that's just a non-starter.
Should those conversations be happening at the same time, or should those be two separate discussions?
It's hard to say. I think looking back on what we did in the Senate with Senate Bill 16 is we were very disciplined about keeping the bill about equity only. And the school code, not the budget. We had a lot of people come in to say, well, you guys need to endorse the 5% income tax. That wasn't going to get us to the true root of the conversation, which is the law and equity, and how the law sets up and preserves inequity. There were others that came in and said, well, you need to institute a voucher system, or we need to have twice as many charter schools in the state. All of those things are ideas that different people on different sides of the aisle have about education in general, but that doesn't get at the root of equity. So if there's anything that gets us to greater equity, ought to be part of the discussion, but a discussion that is strictly a cost shift discussion for the sake of reducing stress on the state budget should not be part of Senate Bill 16. If it has something to do with equity, then it should be, and I think that's not dismissing cost shift discussions because they're so large and it gets superintendent's attention very quickly for good reason. So it's not being dismissive, but I think it's just being consistent with where we've been. If you want to talk about equity, then let's sit down and have a discussion. But if this is about trying to get an idea passed that otherwise can't pass on its own, then no, I'm not interested.
Another problem facing Springfield schools is the amount of state property that doesn't pay property taxes. Is there any hope anymore for an impact fee or whatever you want to call it?
Payment in lieu of taxes?
Yeah. I don't know. I passed that bill, Doug, as you know.
It's not part of state law, as I recall. So.
I don't know. That was... that, in regards to District 186, is one of many, many intricacies that exist today with school districts, and it's exacerbated because we rely so heavily on property taxes in Illinois. So there's other intricacies that are specific to different school districts that we've come across during this process that in some cases are dealt with because of a special state law or in today's funding formula, or in many cases are not, like 186. Could it be part of the final discussion? I think it could be. But again, not to diminish the bill that I passed, but going back to Jad's question, if it's part of equity, that's where it could enter the equation. If it's not, then no. There's other districts that are in a very similar situation to 186 in the state, but they just haven't been as vocal about it, and they have other ways to relieve budgetary pressures. So it hasn't been as big of a deal in terms of how 186 views the issue.
There's a little bitty picture on a couple of ads on TV of someone running against you.
Yeah.
And those ads tell me that for 16 hours you don't care about corruption in NRI. You voted for Obamacare, which I guess means implementing the exchange in Illinois. Did that even pass?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, seals records of drug dealers, Medina Country Club, property tax break. Thoughts about, you obviously have become the focus of your opponent's campaign organization to try to, I guess, at first let people know what's wrong with you. Just your reaction to all of this and the ad campaign and any of those particular issues you wish to address.
Well, I think I'm surprised. I'm surprised at the fact that the opposition's running two negative ads almost back to back on television. That's unprecedented. That's very unusual, especially in September.
Well, not if you're running for governor or something.
Well, right. This is a legislative race, right? So it's unusual. But I think, generally speaking, I think the ads that candidates endorse give voters a window into someone's conscience. And I think it's unusual that anyone running for office, whether it's for a state senate seat or a city council seat or a local government seat, would not first explain why they chose to run in the first place. I think that's unusual, and I think it's problematic, and I think it speaks to many of the larger challenges we face in the system today. So you want me to go through those specifics, Bernie?
Well,
Or you want me-
Medina is interesting just because I remember Lee Daniels always used to have fundraisers there, so you have a Republican running against you who said it's a terrible thing. So what's that one about?
So there was a change in assessing for open space and golf courses. There was a lawsuit involved. This dealt with the Cook County Assessor's Office. The bill actually does opposite of what the commercial claims.
What is it? Do they have a higher tax bill afterwards?
Yeah. Because absent of change, it would have been much lower. Was it the change that everyone was seeking? No. Was the bill better than nothing? Yes. So, it's still being negotiated the way I understand it. The bill passed the Senate. It has not passed the House. It gets at a very intricate issue that deals with assessing of open space and whether or not you assess the full value of a building in a country club or not.
Okay. The Obamacare thing, was that, so Illinois didn't create its own exchange, did it? Or did this just allow the state to use the federal exchange?
No, we did our own.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thoughts on that? I don't know how hot an issue that is. I know it's in congressional races. It's big.
Yeah, well, Obamacare was created by the Congress, not the state Senate or the state House. It was created before I was a member of the state Senate. We had a series of bills every year that deal with implementation of health care in the state through the Medicaid program or through retiree health insurance. There's any number of bills in a given session that deal directly with providing health care and budgeting for health care. I don't know what they're talking about because they don't source anything, which is another troubling thing in the ad. So I don't.
It's HB 3227, according to Mr. Burrian of the Republican staff.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that on the commercial.
No, I don't know if it's on the commercial.
Okay.
I asked him what he was talking about.
Well, I think we all know what they're doing, right? I mean,
what is that?
They're trying to tie a candidate. And this happens not just in my race; it happens in every race. You try to tie a candidate to something that they perceive as unpopular, for political purposes. I go back to my point that I don't know why my opponent's running in the first place.
There's a radio ad that says she wants to fight taxes and corruption.
Yeah, and to my other point, I think everybody wants to fight corruption, and I think everybody wants a balanced tax system. I don't think there's exclusive, rights to Republicans or Democrats to say either of those two things. The question is, how do you do it? And is it enough to complain about it? And I think one reason we face so many problems in the state today is because there's a lot of complainers that walk into the doors down the street. But what we need is people that want to put things into motion, even under difficult times and difficult circumstances. I think by this time 2 years ago, Mayor McElroy and I had 3 public forums. And it was not contentious. It was an open exchange of ideas. And it was me standing up saying, this is how I think we need to change state government. And it was him standing up saying, this is how he thinks we need to change state government. That doesn't happen in this race.
Why is that? Have you agreed to forums? Or?
No, I haven't. No. I mean, I haven't been asked.
Oh,
there haven't been any. I've showed up to many.
And just because this is a competitive process,
Yeah.
I assume you've met Linda Little?
Yeah, we met in Gillespie. Yeah.
Why are you the better candidate? Or anything you want to say about that?
I think, I think it's, I'll say what I said earlier. I think it's not enough to be elected to public office and to explain to people, A, what their problems are, and B, who's to blame for it. I don't think that's enough. And I think that's what I've shown in my first term, is that I want to put solutions on the table to solve problems and be an active part of a discussion at the legislative level as a freshman member of the Senate. And that sometimes puts you in precarious situations when it comes to politics, especially in the 48th Senate District, which is a very diverse Senate district for downstate Illinois. But I think that's what I was sent there to do, and that's what I'm going to continue to do, is be part of that discussion and be part of solving problems that we face in the state. And I don't think my opponent to date has either explained her purpose for running for office or explained how she would fix school funding. She's silent on Senate Bill 16, even though it would bring millions to the districts that she seeks to represent in the state Senate. She hasn't said a word about it. She's said a few things here and there, but I don't even know of her platform But so far, the race has played itself out as back-to-back negative TV ads, 96% of which were paid for by the state Republican Party, not by her efforts for fundraising or a local...
Yeah, it was really the Senate Republican caucus mostly, wasn't it?
It's the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why didn't you say anything for 16 hours at the...
Did anybody watch it?
I watched 4.
Did you?
Yeah.
It wasn't the I'll be delicate here. It wasn't the most shining moment that the legislature has ever displayed in terms of its purpose and what it's seeking to accomplish. I don't think there's anybody in the state that thought that was a legitimate hearing to date, except for my opponent, who now is endorsing an ad to make it seem legitimate. To me, what matters most are votes. Let me back up. The irony too is that there's a couple of individuals who pushed to have that hearing, who are two of the most vocal people in the state that say state government's moving to Chicago. And when they had the opportunity to schedule a hearing, they scheduled it in Chicago. They didn't schedule it here in Springfield because that's where the TV cameras are, and that's where the governor's race is playing itself out. So to deny that politics wasn't 100% behind the hearing, would be untruthful. We've handled this well at the Audit Commission at the same time. We commissioned the audit. We handed the records over to the federal prosecutor's office. I voted to give the co-chairs extraordinary subpoena power, which was extraordinary in terms of the Audit Commission's function and role. My votes are clear and they're consistent with every other member of the commission. What I didn't participate in at the hearing was grandstanding, and it was a 3-ring circus. And I don't operate that way. I generally think that, a lot of times in those hearings, especially when there's more TV cameras than members of the Audit Commission present, that there's a lot of grandstanding going on and, playing to those cameras. I don't do that. And so if I'm guilty of that, then I'll be guilty of not grandstanding. And the other thing, sorry, Bernie, the other thing is everybody knows that the U.S. Attorney was clear that they didn't want any interruption into their criminal investigation. The Audit Commission doesn't investigate criminality. It's not its purpose. It's not its role. Does it uncover it? Yes. Is it a criminal investigatory body? No, it's not. Do you take appropriate steps if you uncover things like that? Absolutely, and that's what we did, and that's what I supported.
Is the commission going to resume in what is it, a couple of weeks now?
Yeah, we're scheduled for the first week of October. I think that's to be determined still.
Yeah, just given what's going on with NRI and now with subpoenas coming out from the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, just politically, are you fully in support of Governor Quinn, and how much damage is this doing to your race, that kind of a thing?
Well, no, I support the Democratic ticket, and I don't know if it's I don't know if it's doing damage to the race or not. What I try to concentrate on is this is why I ran 2 years ago, was to solve problems and represent the 48th district, and this is what I've done during my short time, and this is what I hope to continue and even add to in the next term. That's what I've focused on, and you can see that reflected in my paid media during the campaign through TV and mail, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
This may be semantics, but he asked you if you support Governor Quinn. You said you support the Democratic ticket. You didn't say you support Governor Quinn. But tell me,
I do.
What has Governor Quinn done well in his term?
So I think we should acknowledge that got to get the year right. It would have been 2009, I guess. When the it was extraordinary removal of a governor from office that was elected twice. That the state was in a wreck. It was in a wreck, and he inherited a mess. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And I think there's been sizable progress on things like making the full pension payment in the state budget, reducing the number of unpaid bills, not doing new borrowing, just as a budget balancing tactic. All of those things, or for example, doing Medicaid expansion not by paying for it, but by moving unpaid bills off or, expanding the payment cycle, again, is a tactic to appear to be balanced. Those things were, regular occurrences, and those things have stopped. And you can see in budget documents that those things have had a positive impact. I think there's been an earnest conversation and a real conversation about revenue. We need revenue to fund state government. It's an outstanding question about how much. I think we need to do more conversing about, if we don't have revenue, this is what, these are real things that are going to happen. I'm disappointed so far in the governor's race that I don't think the debate has gotten to that point yet. I think it should, but I don't think it's gotten to that point. But I think those are all improvements, and we got a long way to go, but I think those things, those are big improvements from where we were back in 2008, 2009 when the previous governor was removed from office.
I know you had, Governor Quinn also signed a bill to create marriage equality in Illinois. You maybe were the southernmost legislator in all of America to vote for that, and I know there was clearly some people in your district unhappy with that. What are the ramifications down the road? Any regrets? Any thoughts? Is that an issue? Because I haven't seen it on any commercials or anything.
I have no regrets for that vote. I think it was the right thing to do, and I still continue to believe it's the right thing to do. I've had 35 town halls in the district during my first term, from here in Springfield. Last one I had actually was at Union Baptist Church.
Right before the deluge. That's
right, that night.
During the deluge.
It was during, that's right. Yeah. And to very small towns like Coffeen, it's important to me to be accessible, even in the face of controversy. I fully am aware that my vote, I have to be accountable for my votes, and whether people agree with them or disagree with them. But I don't have any regrets, Bernie, voting for that bill. I think it was the right thing to do, and I think our state is better because of it.
Do people ever bring it up to you at your town halls? People are
one time. Yeah.
35 town halls.
Yeah, one time. But I think, like any issue that's controversial, whether it's marriage equality or the 5% income tax, I have found through the town halls that we've had that, generally speaking, people appreciate a thoughtful discussion about tough issues. And I think it raises an understanding, for example, about what a particular bill does and doesn't do, because let's face it, there's a lot of misinformation out there about controversial things in state government. But the fact that, I learn a lot from town halls too. I learn an incredible amount from town halls. It helps shape my opinion. And I just, and it's literally Q&A, it was, some go 2 hours. Sometimes I have 5 people, sometimes we have 100. But it's a valuable thing. It's a valuable interaction.
That's why a bill's been introduced to create a task force to look into the total legalization of marijuana in the state. Is that something, would you vote for the idea of a task force to look at this issue, or are you adamantly opposed to the idea of ever legalizing it?
No, I wouldn't vote for that. I think we have to get the law that I did vote for implemented. I think we have to go through there's a sunset on that law, the bill that Senator Haynes sponsored in the Senate. I think we have to get through that period, and we have to make an assessment about the impact of the law.
You were also, I remember watching a hearing where I think there was a task force established because of heroin deaths.
Yes.
Was it Representative Yingling you were working with?
Yeah.
What is the situation with that? Has that task force been meeting, and what's the status of all of that?
Yeah, it hasn't met in a while. There's also another task force, I believe, that the House is taking up, all trying to get at the same thing. There's a few nuances between the two. Our effort was to address the heroin epidemic, and it's the heroin epidemic in the state. It exists, it's real in every part of the state, even in rural counties. Address it through prevention, through the public education system. Because the statistics about younger children becoming addicted in children. I mean, which is a startling thing to say, but it's true. It's highly addictive. It's highly deadly. And the usage rates are going up in all parts of the state. So the idea was to link programs to facilitate prevention in public schools. There's also a law enforcement component, but our focus was prevention at a young age. That was our focus. So I think in the coming session, Bernie, I think there'll be a couple of bills that seek to, and it's not going to be a panacea of problem solving. I mean, this is a very complicated thing. This isn't like meth. Meth was, there was a very broad approach to meth that dealt with prevention and heavy on law enforcement, heavy on penalties. Who has access to pseudoephedrine? Locking, putting barriers there. Heroin is very different. Addressing this issue is a very different thing. So that task force was heavy on prevention, and I think you'll see, a couple of bills designed to make sure that the prevention methods are introduced sooner in public school system.
We're hitting our time here. I did want to ask, you signed on to the community benefits agreement having to do with rail improvements here. Are you able to help with the assurances that the benefits, the job benefits and economic developments from that will go where people are wanting them to go, to the neighborhood, to the people who are affected? Is there anything that you can do as a lawmaker to help make that happen?
Yeah, this came up at our town hall. The last town hall, which would have been a couple weeks ago. And it was, it's been discussed, how do we make sure that the CBA is exercised fully, and how do we not forget, and I'm concerned right now that the tenets of the community benefits agreement that led to acceptance of 10th Street are being forgotten. I'm concerned about that today. And this came up in the town hall, and there were individuals that were very vocal about this, individuals that were part of that discussion that led to the community benefit agreement that have brought to my attention that they're concerned as well. So if you look at, what could the state's role be in that? First of all, the state has to support the project. It's a tremendous opportunity for Springfield and for the region, not just Springfield and Sangamon County, but the entire region. But we have to remember how we got to where we are today. And we can't forget that it will have a significant impact on Springfield and the people that live around, in the immediate vicinity of the project. At the same time, it's an incredible opportunity which the CBA presents, that we have a chance, I think, to incorporate job training, minority and female contracting, all of the things that we strive for as a state government into hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment in Springfield. So the good news is we have time, because in a lot of instances, I think, when you take a state project or you take a school district project, sometimes it's difficult to find minority contractors or minority workers to work on those projects, and that may be the case. But what we have right now is we have the opportunity to thread this needle and to get it right, and to use this project as a showpiece for the state of Illinois on how to do these things. And the work that was done on the ground level is so valuable. And that's why the agreement itself that I was proud to sign, I think is the roadmap to get it done, and it has to be followed. And if it isn't followed, I don't believe that the project's going to move forward. It has to be followed. And I think the state does have a role in that, and we're working through what is appropriate. And this again came from several discussions I had, but we had a fairly significant discussion about this at the town hall at Union Baptist Church.
Are there any final questions for you?
I always like to go back to, so you said you learned a lot from town hall.
Yeah.
So could you tell something, and maybe tell something on the other side, how you helped people learn things about whatever? at a town hall meeting?
Yeah, let me just say this generally. It's amazing. I live in a town, 1,800 people, but there's a real feeling of disconnect to state government, not just in rural communities where we've seen jobs leave in big numbers and poverty has grown, which we don't ever talk about. We don't ever talk about that in state government, how much poverty in small towns has grown over the past decade. But even here in Springfield, of all places, when I talk to groups and individuals in my districts, whether it's at a town hall setting or at a community forum, there's a feeling of disconnect to state government, as if, and I think this is warranted, as if there's not ample investment or equal investment in many parts of the 48 Senate district. So that is the general feeling I get from these town halls, is that whether an individual is a Republican, a Democrat, very conservative, or very liberal, there's a feeling that we have to get back on track, and that starts with a conversation with state government, along with others too. But here's an example. I had a town hall in Stonington. And Stonington's a rural community in Christian County, and they had an incredible outlay of resources coming their way to address challenges they were facing with their public water system. And they were kind of at a point to where they didn't know what else to do. So this came out of the town hall that alderman there came to the meeting and said, "Hey, Senator, we got to fix this. We can't raise this money on our own, but people need water, and they need clean water, and it's part of our community's future. But not only is it part of the community's future, it's part of basic services and services that people need. They're necessities, and so we found a way to help them out. And I don't know if that conversation would have happened because I think there's a sense that people feel as if state government's not serving them well. So when an elected official goes and has a conversation like this, nothing but good comes out of it, even if there's a disagreement in my mind, because at least people leave with a greater understanding for how their elected official feels, and I leave with a greater understanding for how they feel. But Stonington would be one, Hillsborough would be another. They have incredible challenges in the community when it comes to infrastructure. That rural areas just can't do on their own anymore. They can't do on their own. I say this sometimes, and people push back and say, well, that's not state government's responsibility. And whether it is or isn't is immaterial. But what is important is that if Hillsborough can't do it on its own, then is everyone happy with just Hillsborough going on the path that it's going? And the answer is no. So, the CBA the other night here in Springfield, all of those things I think have led to a greater discussion, and that's how I view my role. And this isn't town halls aren't kumbaya. I mean, there's significant disagreement with them or at them, but that's okay. That's okay in my book. And that's what we need more of, in my opinion. And that's a small part that I think I play in trying to get that done.
Did Stonington get some sort of
EPA
grant?
Yeah. A lot of these things is just, there's not an awareness of what is even available. And a lot of it isn't even grants, for example. It's proper planning, plan properly, set goals for a community, identify what your needs are. When it comes to water or sewer projects, which is essential for any community, whether it's big or small, it's mostly loans. It's getting the community qualified in a place to where they can set goals and apply for funding. And most of the time, it's not even a grant program. Most of the time, it's just planning, and it's beginning that conversation.